Okay, so the outline that we'll be using for today's lectures is what you are currently seeing on my screen. Primarily, since we are going to deal with culture and its role in the practice of international human resource management, it becomes necessary that we look at the various definitions of culture, and at the end of the day, you are expected to either adopt the one that I'll be presenting or you come up with your own definition. Then we're also going to look at why it is important for the issue of culture to be considered in an attempt to conduct international businesses. Then we look at the concept of culture as having 3 layers. So in there, we will be looking at the various levels that you can come across culture in an attempt to conduct international business. Then we will also look at, in order to appreciate how culture actually influences the practice of international HRM, or in the wider spectrum, international business, we'll be looking at the research findings by Jed Hosted. So this one, those of you who were in my class in level 200, organizational behavior, I treated it. So this will be a revision for you. Now, then for your reading assignments, go and also look at the research findings by F. Tramponas. That is a reading assignment for you. So for the purpose of today's class, we are going to look at the findings of Jed Hosted. And as I treat it, please, I will entreat you to pay attention to the implications of those findings. I mean, when we get to the Hosted's cultural dimensions of the cultural models and how it influences the practice of international HRM, because you people are now specializing in the field of HRM, I will entreat you to be paying attention to the implications and even be reading around these implications. So if I'm going to examine you on these cultural models, those are the things that will be of interest to me. Okay. Then to sum up the lecture, we also look at the issue of convergence and divergence, and more recently, cross-vergence. Okay. All right. So now let's kick the ball rolling. So from the preceding lectures, one issue that overlaps across all my presentations is that it is pretty much difficult for multinational enterprises to maintain their global autonomy, but at the same time, localize their practices and policies across the globe. So the first point over here is trying to say that many of the most important and difficult challenges to the conduct of international human resource management stems from the differences encountered in various countries and multinational cultures. Now, the input from this point is that most multinational enterprises at one point in time will be dealing with another subsidiary country. Yes, Genevieve.
Please, my screen is black.
Oh, really?
Yes.
Okay, let me. Can anyone confirm to me whether they are not seeing my screen?
Yes, I say your screen is showing.
So what are you currently viewing from my screen?
That we are having the background this thing, slide.
Very good. So then, Genevieve, it might be coming from your network, okay?
Yes, please. I've experienced it before, and then the woman asked me to log out and come back, so I will do that. So, sir, okay. Please hold on, don't continue.
All right, so you are pause, okay?
Thank you.
So, according to research, many of the most important and difficult challenges to the conduct of international human resource management comes from the differences that are encountered in various countries and multinational enterprises cultures. So the import from this particular bullet is that a major issue that confronts people who pursue international business, and particularly because we are now coming from the HR background, in the pursuit of international human resource management, comes from the differences that these multinational enterprises, as well as their workforce, encounter with respect to the differences in cultures. In other words, as firms expand and create subsidiaries in other countries, they get to interact and intercommunicate or engage in commerce with these stakeholders in the other countries. And for that matter, whenever they realize that there are differences in cultures, it becomes very much difficult for them to forge ahead. And so to be successful, it is admonished that we pay keen attention to the various differences that we are likely to encounter as international firms whenever we operate with individuals from different cultures or different countries. And at one point in time, in the pursuit of international business, even if you are not dealing with a different country, per se, or multiple countries, you are likely to hire workforce from different countries. And so you can be operating or working in the headquarters of a company, perhaps located in Ghana. But because it is an international firm, you'll be working with different employees who hail from different countries. And so it kind of complicates the culture that will be created within the context of the organization. And that is why this particular lecture is important, because it will not only draw your attention to the issue of culture and how it differs as you move from one country to the other, but it will also sensitize you to be receptive towards people who share different opinion about the way things are supposed to be done, especially if these opinions are rooted in their culture. So let me see if I've left something out. Now, often these differences clash when firms conduct business in multiple countries. And this is particularly true when you have an international firm setting up subsidiaries in different countries, especially if these countries are also widely dispersed, such that one will be located in a particular region, such as the African region, whereas another will be located in the European region, and so on and so forth. Now, because of the disparity in culture, oftentimes the way we will expect things to be done will be crashing, because all of us will be analyzing these issues from our cultural spectacle. And for that matter, it becomes necessary that we are very much accommodating towards different opinions. Now, this can become a particular salient or important challenge when business people lack knowledge of or sensitivity to these differences, resulting in their making mistake in both the business and the personal interactions. So this is a way of summing up the reason why we have to become very much sensitive to these differences. Because whereas you are thinking your way of doing things, your way of transacting business should be accepted, those from different countries will also be expecting that, because their style of conducting commerce has yields favorable results, it should rather be accepted. And the danger here is that if you think you are operating from the headquarters, and so all the directions, all the policy directions and instructions should be accepted wholeheartedly without any sort of challenge, then you are doomed to fail, because at the end of the day, your compatriots at the subsidiary level are also working in a different context altogether. So our sensitivity to these cultural differences becomes paramount. Let me see. Even when they know the differences, they can mistakenly assume that their own country exactly. So this is what I was saying about you not being ethnocentric, or you not assuming that your style of conducting business from your culture or your country should be seen as the best or the superior one. Okay. Now, so enough about the background. Can you still see my screen?
Yes, sir.
Yes,
So why is it
Yes,
moving?
sir.
I'm trying to move on to the next slide, but so let me unshare and share it again. Can you see my screen now?
yes, sir.
So
Yes, sir.
what are you seeing now?
What is culture?
Very good. So now let's consider some definitional issues as far as culture is concerned. And I am operating under the assumption that all of you have come across culture. And if I ask you to define it, I'm sure you are going to tell me the ones that you came across at the secondary school or the primary school, JHS level, that culture is a way a group of people live. At this level, if you tell me that you are going to lose some points, because you are not giving me the intricacies of what actually culture entails. Okay, so we are going to operate with two selected definitions that I have here, and at the end of the day, you can either come out with your own definition which you are comfortable with. Once you are able to present the salient components, it should be okay. You can also adopt any of these definitions, depending on whether it situates well with your frame of reference. Okay. Now, so in the conduct of international business or in the practice of international human resource management, cultural differences is something that you can never overlook. And for us to appreciate these cultural differences, it becomes important that we look at what the culture, what it is. So, according to Hofstede, culture can be defined as the collective mental programming of people in an environment which differentiates one human group from another. So I'm taking Hofstede's definition again. He defines culture as the collective mental programming of people in an environment which differentiates one human group from another. Now, let's break this definition down. It is quite nuanced because it's talking about so many things simultaneously. When Hofstede talks about culture being a collective mental programming, he is primarily trying to denote culture by making reference to some sort of coding that is administered to people right from the time they are giving birth to until the time they might decide they will leave the earth. And when I talk about coding, I mean when you are born into this world, it is presumed theoretically that you come with a tabula rasa, a blank mind. And so you have no knowledge about the environment that you are born into or the country that you are born into. Rather, the people that nurture you and bring you up gradually try to um, send messages or information into your mind. And as you assimilate it, it becomes part and parcel of your behavior. So this processes is what we call the programming of the mind. And so whenever Hofstede makes reference to mental programming, that is the sort of gradual nurturance or upbringing that we give to people so that they will be able to survive within the country or the society that they are born into. Now, another aspect of Hofstede's definition, which is important for us to consider, is that this mental programming differentiates one human group from the other. In other words, if you ask a Ghanaian their best dish, the food they like best, they are likely to mention fufu and light soup. A friend is saying pokora. And pesi, they are also likely to mention akple and fatridity and so on and so forth. Now, if you ask a typical Italian, they are also likely to come up with certain kinds of foodstuffs as far as their preferences are concerned, like pizza, pasta, and so on and so forth. If you ask an American, they are also likely to come up with different sort of foodstuff as far as their preferences are concerned. All these differences in their preferences with the food they like throw much light on the issue that when culture programs your mind in a given environment, it tends to also differentiate you from other people. Another typical example that you can use to illustrate the differentiation component from one group of one human group to another is that if you take language, even within Ghana, we have over 42 languages. Okay, the moment you move beyond the borders of Ghana to, let's say, Ivory Coast, Nigeria, Cote d'Ivoire, and what have you, you also start encountering different languages. Now, you can also say the same thing about styles of dressing. All these things simply come back to the issue that culture helps to code the mind or program the mind of people in a given environment. And this programming is collective in the sense that it is strongly upheld or accepted by people who find themselves in that environment. So that the moment you move from this environment to another environment, then you start seeing variations or differences. You start encountering people that also have different sort of mental programming. Now, the take home from the first definition is that you shouldn't assume your style of conducting business is the best, simply because you are operating based on how you have been programmed and how this sort of programming has also been collectively initiated. So you are likely to encounter different ways of conducting business as and when you move to different subsidiaries or different cultural contexts. Now, let's also quickly look at another definition by Edgar Schein. So I'm referring to this particular one, Edgar Schein. Now, Edgar Schein also provides an interesting definition of culture, which will help us to appreciate the differences we encounter as we read around international HRM and international business. And he defines it as a set of basic assumptions of external adaptation and internal integration, which have evolved over time and are handed down from one generation to the next. So I'm taking it again. Shane is of the view that culture is a set of basic assumptions of external adaptation and internal integration, which have evolved over time and are handed down from one generation to the next. Now, so when Shane talks about culture being a set of basic assumptions of external adaptation, what does it mean, or what is he trying to say? He is also trying to make reference to the way people are brought up in order to survive. So here, the external adaptation has to do with it has a survival value. In other words, how well should a person be brought up so that anytime they encounter some challenges in their external environment, they will be able to overcome it or um, adjust to rates. So the adjustment component to the issues that will confront us or the challenges that we encounter in our society or in our country or in the context where we are being brought up is the part that he is referring to as the basic assumptions. And he also considered it to be basic because once we come from that particular environment or society, it is the go-to strategy that you will use to adjust. So that the moment you move from that particular context, you realize that other people are also using different strategies to adjust to their external ordeals, which might vary from the way you are familiar with. Now, there is also another component of the definition, which is internal integration. Internal integration can be likened to Hofstede's collective components when he was explaining culture. Internal integration means that that strategy which are used to nurture people from their childhood to the time they leave the earth actually brings them together. So there is some amount of collective conscience when it comes to that style of culture binding them together. And Shane continues that these external adaptations or adjustment strategies and internal integration, which helps to bind them together, have evolved over time and are handed down from one generation to the other. So which means that it is from our forefathers in that particular cultural context. And as the environment changes and becomes more harsher, we also try to vary or make some adjustment to our external adaptation and internal integration so that over time we will survive. So that is why I indicated that it has a survival value. So if you cast your mind back to even our fashion sense, from Adam to date, you will realize that the fashion sense has evolved. And when we look at the way our parents or our grandfathers or forefathers were dressing, you can see some traces of it in the way we are currently also dressing, even our style of cooking. Where did the first person even get the mind that if you, for instance, banana and granules, This is an example I often use. Now, to a typical Ghanaian, eating banana with granuts is a norm. And if you ask them why we combine banana and granuts, you are likely to hear that, oh, that is what we were taught from our infancy. And if you question, so why do you combine it? You might not be able to get a readily answer that will make sense. And these are some of the issues that are handed from generation to generation. But a typical European, so for instance, and if you are speaking with a Norwegian, or if a Norwegian finds you eating banana with granules, they usually call it peanuts. It is something that they will construe as very much absurd, because granules is a meal on its own. Banana is also a fruit. And so they do not see the commonality for you to be combining such a food item. Okay. So depending on the cultural context that you are brought up with, perhaps eating the banana with the granules is a form of delicacy. And the moment you associate with it, then you can be construed as coming from a context like where Ghana, and so on and so forth. Now, let's quickly also look at the layers of culture. So far, I have generically spoken about what culture is and how it shapes us and differentiates us from other people from different countries or contexts. But at what point can we say that the culture of Ghana is different from the culture of Nigerians or the culture of an American? To appreciate some of these differences and the challenges that you are even likely to encounter in an attempt to identify these variations, it is important you look at the layers or the nuances of culture. So what are these layers? Generically, there are three main layers. So Edgar Schein will tell you there are three. Hofstede, in his seminar paper, he was construing them as two, and later on he also expanded it to three. So irrespective of how you look at it, at least there are some layers. Now, what are these layers? The general consensus in literature, or according to research, is that culture has multiple layers. Now, the first part of the layer is what has been construed as artifacts or manifestations. Now, when we talk about the artifacts or manifestations as a layer of culture, we are basically referring to the visible parts of culture, which is readily available to even people who do not come from those cultural contexts. Please, I'm taking it again. When we talk about artifacts or manifestations as the first layer of culture, it primarily refers to the visible parts of culture. You can even say the material component of culture. So these components can be seen, they can be felt, some could also be touched, and so on and so forth. Now, to appreciate the artifacts or the manifestation component of culture, let us liken it to an iceberg. And by the way, please, do you understand what an iceberg is? Hello, do you understand what an iceberg is?
Yes, sir.
Okay, good. So what is an iceberg? Anyone can quickly explain for me to see if you are at the same page with me. What is an iceberg? Oh, but I thought you said you understand it.
Hello, sir.
Go on.
It's a very, I don't know how to say, greater portion of ice,
Mm-hmm.
you know, and it's kind of very huge and quite, I don't know,
Okay. So I
difficult to
see you have the
contain.
idea. All right.
Yes.
So an iceberg is basically
it's like an ice cube.
it's what? Ice
It's
cube.
like ice cube.
Okay, so I like your usage of the term ice cube. So just picture it like an ice cube, a big or huge ice cube, more or less like a mountain, but which is submerged in an ocean. And usually there is a portion of this ice which protrudes out of the ocean. And the part which will be protruding out of the ocean is usually small. So from an outsider's perspective, you might be thinking, oh, the ice in the ocean is very, very little. But beneath the protruding part is the larger chunk of the iceberg, which is huge, as big as that of a mountain. Good. So now likening the manifest or the artifact components of culture to an iceberg, we can say that the part of the iceberg which is protruding out of the ocean or which is visible is the manifest part. Now, this indicates that a chunk of it or a huge aspect of the ice is actually submerged in the ocean. And to make good sense of culture, there's the need for you to go beyond the visible parts so that you can appreciate why it is even visible in the first place or why that portion is actually protruding. So that is about the artifacts. We are now going to look at the invisible parts of culture. Now, the invisible parts of culture are those aspects of the culture which actually explains the visible parts. In other words, it tries to lend explanation to why we like a particular food or why we wear the style of clothing we are used to, or why we tend to operate in familiar situations, that is in families or in groups, or why we tend to use a particular language. Now, so the invisible parts also have two layers. And the first one is can you see my screen? Hello, can you see my screen?
Yes, we can see.
Just a minute. Let me find my charger and connect it so I'll be with you in about 5 minutes, okay? The authorities that make reference to culture composing of three layers indicates that the first component is what they call manifest or artifact component of culture. And basically the artifact or the manifest component has to do with the aspect of culture which is visible and accessible to not only the cultural participants, but those who are even outsiders. Okay. Now, they continue that in order for us to appreciate the visible parts of culture or the artifacts, why people dress the way they dress, why they eat a particular kind of food, why they tend to enjoy operating in group situations. It is important that we look at the invisible parts, which is composed of two main subcomponents. Now, the first subcomponent of the invisible parts is what we call the norms and values.
Sir.
Hello.
Sir.
Yes, hello.
Yeah, before we move to the invisible part, you know, by explaining the visible part, they gave us an example of iceberg.
Yes.
Can we move on to cite another example on a causal visibility that will give us the what do you call it, a common understanding of the visibility that we are talking about, apart from the iceberg? Maybe in a culture, because in reading through the second lane, you talk about way of greeting, clothing, the way of walking, managing, and importance of the family or group, even in language. So apart from that, in the visibility side, what can we use as an example that will make it very clear as
for the visible one?
Yes, apart from the iceberg, yes.
Oh, okay. So the logic behind the use of iceberg here, you missed it. So let me try and clarify again. I'm saying that culture is composed of three main levels or three main layers. The first layer is what we consider to be artifacts or the manifest components. And these manifest components are parts of the culture which the cultural participants, so the individuals that find themselves in that particular society, and even those outside this, are able to see and appreciate about the culture. So a typical example is the architecture, the food, the clothing, how people greet, the norms, the family system, and how even people interact and intercommunicate, their language, and so on and so forth. Now, to appreciate this manifest or visible part of culture, I am saying that we have to liken it to an iceberg. And when the logic of likening it to an iceberg is that an iceberg has just a tip of it or a portion of it which is protruding and pretty much visible to everyone around it. But a chunk of it, and a majority part of the iceberg, is submerged in the ocean. So bringing this or connecting this with the layers of culture, we are saying that the manifest part, which is how people greet, the food they eat, the way they dress, is just a figment and a small part of the culture. In other words, it is the first layer of culture. And in order to appreciate this particular first layer, you need to go further or probe deeper into it. So still on the iceberg issue, the moment we go, we now delve deeper into the ocean to appreciate the size of the whole iceberg. Then it means we are moving beyond the physical part or the visible part. Please, is it clear now?
Now it's very clear to me. It's like now it's open. So okay. I understand.
Cool. So we are now going to look at the part of the iceberg which is submerged, still connecting it with culture. So which aspect of culture can we not see, or especially if you are not part of the cultural participants? Into the part of the iceberg which is what's hidden. So the second component is what we call the norms and values. And the third component, or the core of culture, it's what we construe as the basic underlying assumptions. Maybe this will make it clearer. Can you see this diagram?
Yes, it's clear. We've seen it.
So it looks like an onion that has been slashed into half, right? The first layer over here is the artifacts or the manifestation. And I said the parts that I was likening to the visible part of an iceberg. These parts, according to research, can be seen by the cultural actors or participants and even people from different cultural contexts. And examples include the language that is spoken over there, the style of dressing, the kind of architecture that dominates that particular cultural context, and so on and so forth, the food they eat. Now, beyond this surface culture, and I say visible parts or the artifacts, you can, in fact, you can actually appreciate it or understand it better when you start delving deeper into these two other components. So the hidden culture is what I refer to as the norms and values. The hidden culture, and I say the second component of culture, refers to the norms and values. And what are norms? What are values? So why is it considered to be normal for women to dress in a particular way, different from men? Why is it considered to be normal for Ghanaians to be fascinated by African prints? The moment you start questioning some of these behavioral patterns, then it means you have moved into the hidden culture. In other words, you are trying to explain what you encountered at the manifest level over here. So why is it considered to be normal? And I say, why is it considered to be the order if you greet with your right hand instead of the left hand? And here I'm not only referring to superiors or people in authority, but even your police. Why do we use the right hand to greet and not the left hand? The moment you start trying to raise or find explanations to some of these behavioral patterns, then we are dealing with the hidden culture. Now, the third component of culture is the invisible culture, and that is what Edgar Schein construed as the basic underlying assumptions. The basic underlying assumptions. So, the basic underlying assumptions or the invisible part of culture primarily deals with the belief systems, the philosophy, which underpin our norms and our behavioral patterns. So I'm taking it again. The core parts of the diagram you are seeing here, which is the invisible parts or the basic underlying assumptions of culture, is what Edgar Schein refers to as the belief system, the reasoning or philosophy, which underpins the norms and values we hold as people and how it also influences us to behave in a particular way. In Timosha, the invisible part is influencing the hidden culture, which is further influencing the surface culture. So let me go back to the greeting example. In Ghana, in a typical Ghanaian classroom, it will not be out of place to see people raising up their right hand when they want to ask questions. So it is actually a culture that we appreciate. Now, when it comes to the hidden culture, the explanation to the raise of the right hand is that we consider it to be normal. In other words, it will be abnormal for you to raise your left hand when you are speaking, you are trying to ask a question in a classroom. Now, there is an underlying assumption behind the usage of the right hand as opposed to the left hand. And the reasoning behind it can be found in the invisible culture. Please, is the explanation I'm making clear now?
Yes.
Very good. All the slides here, they are just explanations or words in the author's balance. So you can, once you get this understanding, you can always explain it in your own way, okay? So the surface or the explicit culture is the outer layer or the artifact, and I said the manifest. The hidden culture is the middle layer, okay? Then the invisible or the implicit culture is the core, and I said the basic underlying assumptions that I was referring to. All right. Now let's link these issues with national business or cross-cultural. Yes, hello. Hello.
The invisible part, as you are saying, that means you cannot get it. It's not always accurate. It's based on assumption and then how you see things moving. Is that not so?
Precisely.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
So it is. We consider them to be invisible because you can't see how a person is thinking. When someone is trying to philosophize, you will not be able to see it. But those things will manifest in the way they perhaps speak, or the way they greet, the way they behave. So we are trying to link what goes on in our behavior to what goes on in our mind. Okay. In order to appreciate how cultural values vary from one cultural context or from one country to another, we will quickly take a look at Jed Hofstede's cultural dimensions. And in his seminal paper, he was primarily trying to understand the various types of cultures which come together when firms operate in an international landscape. So what am I trying to say? I'm trying to say that when a firm goes international and they start setting up subsidiaries and they start recruiting and selecting people from different cultural contexts to come and work either in the parent company or in the subsidiary, or when the firm employ local nationals to work for them in a subsidiary context, what sort of cultures come together to assist them to achieve their strategic imperatives? That is what we are going to look at. Now, to do this, Hofstede conducted a cultural study in IBM. And at that time, IBM had had subsidiaries across 15 countries. So it means that at any point in time, either you are at the headquarters or you are at a remote subsidiary, you are likely to encounter policies or programs which are either homegrown or exported from the headquarters. And so how did they manage the cultural issues over there? Those were some of the issues that was of importance or interest to Jed Hofstede. And by trying to understand the similarities and differences in culture among the participants who operated across the 15 subsidiaries of IBM, Hofstede came to a conclusion that globally, you can categorize cultural models into 4 main quadrants. In other words, if you take any firm that is operating as a multinational enterprise, the culture that cluster within this firm can be categorized into 4 main types. And what are these types? The first one is the degree of individualism and collectivism. The second one is the degree of acceptance of power distance between superiors and subordinates. The third one is the degree of uncertainty avoidance, or one's tolerance level for ambiguity or risk. Now, the fourth one is masculinity versus femininity in social values. So, in the original seminal paper of Hofstede, he ended up identifying four main models or four main types of culture that can be found within multinational enterprises. And these are the four. But later on, the cultural models or the cultural theory was expanded to include a fifth component, which is called time horizon. So please, when you are asked to explain Hofstede's cultural dimensions or his findings on national cultures, I expect you to articulate not only these four, but the entire five. So the fifth one is what we call time horizon, whether you are dealing with a short-term time horizon or a long-term time horizon. They are all in the slides. So as I discuss them in turns, I will be introducing them to you, okay? So Hofstede found not only that certain countries consistently show similarities based on the presence of these characteristics, that is, these ones, but also that there are clearly major differences between the various groupings of countries. So if, for instance, Americans, people from United Kingdom, people from Russia are considered to be individualistic, and for that matter, they have this particular traits or characteristics as a similarity between them, you will realize that they also differ in great magnitude when compared to Ghanaians, Chinese, Indians, who are considered to be what? Collectivistic. So that is what the first point is trying to say. Now, the significant conclusion for multinational enterprises was that the idea was wrong that managerial and organizational systems as developed and practiced in parent country and parent company of a multinational enterprise should be or could be imposed upon multinational enterprises foreign subsidiaries. So Hofstede drew a conclusion that because every country has its own cultural norms and values, and these norms and values also may differ from country to country as you move across the globe, then it will be suicidal for multinational enterprises to develop HR policies and programs which are consistent with the culture of the headquarters to be exported wholeheartedly to subsidiaries without any sort of modification. So the bottom line is that Hofstede is admonishing HR practitioners to be concerned of not assuming that policies and practices as they exist at the headquarters may yield favorable results when they are exported to the subsidiaries countries. All right, let's take them one by one. Can you see my screen? Hello, can you see my screen?
Yes,
Yes,
sir.
sir. Yes, sir.
But it was not moving as my end here.
Sir, it moves so.
Oh, really?
Yes.
Then maybe it's my network. So let me share them again. Okay, so you can see the model now.
Yes, sir.
Good. I'm trying to click on the slide share, but anyway, so let's go on. So these are the cultural dimensions that Hofstede identified. It includes individualism versus collectivism, masculinity versus femininity, uncertainty avoidance, long-term versus short-term time horizon, and power distance. Now, so let's take what individualism, collectivism means. So the first dimension of culture that was identified by Hofstede based on his research is what he construed as individualism and collectivism. And by the way, each of these dimensions fall in a continuum, which means that at one end of the pole, we have people being individualistic, and at another end of the pole, we have people being collectivistic. So depending on the score that you obtain, you are likely to be labeled as being an individualistic, or you are likely to be labeled as being what? A collectivistic. Please, what I just said, did you understand it?
Yes, sir.
Okay, so who can paraphrase it for me to see whether you understood it?
Hello, sir.
Yes.
Please repeat it again. Kind.
No problem. So some of your colleagues understood it. Let them try to paraphrase it for me to see, so that we can move from the known to the unknown. So Hussein, can you paraphrase what I just said?
Yes, he said describing, like say, to describe the degree of which individuals are integrated into groups. A person may likely to be in part of the group or to separate himself in a way that maybe will suit whatever the way will suit his interest. So you are likely to be either individualistic or be part of a group.
Okay. So the idea is there. But, sir, the part I said that it falls in a continuum, it seems you did not get it. So let me quickly illustrate it. Moment, 1 minute, and I'm connecting me peripheral. Hello, can you see my screen?
Yes, sir.
Sir.
Good. Let me quickly.
You will rewind yourself.
All right. So now let's continue. This was just by way of helping you to understand what I meant by the dimensions falling in a continuum. Okay. So the first, can you see my screen now?
Yes, sir.
What are you seeing now?
You know, lower to a bit higher.
Oh, then let me share the one I'm currently using. So can you see individualism, collectivism?
Yes, sir.
Very good. So that is the first cultural dimension that we are going to analyze. And according to Hofstede, this dimension describes the degree to which individuals are integrated into groups. So to what extent can we consider Ghanaians as integrated into groups such as families, and now say the community, the church that where they fellowship? So to what extent can we say this? Likewise, to what extent can we say Americans or people from the Great Britain, the United Kingdom, are integrated into groups? This sort of comparison brings us to individualism and collectivism. So that if people are highly integrated into groups, then we say they are what? Collectivistic society. Whereas when individuals are less integrated into groups, then we say they are what? Individualistic people. So, for example, in the United States, they are an individualist society. That is, each person looks after him or herself and immediate family. There is more focus on individual accomplishments as opposed to group accomplishments. So, what we are trying to say over here, or the input from this particular point, is that when we say a particular society is an individualistic society, it simply means that the people in there enjoy solitary pursuits. They are the people that always assume me, myself, and I. So everything is self-centered. Now, the threshold that they will go to even embark on integration is where they start thinking about their immediate family. Please, is the individualism component okay? All right. Now, in a collectivistic society or in collectivistic context, that society is based on group cohesion, or the extent to which people enjoy being within family groups or work groups. It could even be your community groups. As a result, the focus is on the good of the group rather than the individual. So we are saying that unlike in individualistic contests where the participants enjoy solitary pursuits, or they enjoy going by the cliche that's me, myself, and I. In collectivistic contests, the participants enjoy being in social pursuits. So in a typical Ghanaian context, the role of the extended family in our day-to-day activities cannot be overemphasized. The same can be said about the Asians, people from Asian context. So that is about collectivism. Now, let's delve deeper into how these two dimensions can be characterized. So in individualistic cultures, we are referring to cultures in which people define themselves as individual and they form looser ties with their groups. So that is what I meant by the individuals are self-centered and they tend to make reference to their own accomplishments. And sir, people define themselves over here, and that is what we refer to as self-construct. How do you construe or construct yourself? So if you are asked if I ask you to tell me about yourself, I'm referring to your self-construct. Typically, someone from an individualistic context, in an attempt to define themselves, will make reference to their personal accomplishments, their personal their strengths, their weaknesses. They are less likely to make reference to the family in which they were born into, or the community that they come from. Now, because things in individualistic contexts or societies tend to be self-centered, these cultures value autonomy and independence of the person. So typically, a Norwegian, when you do, if I'm not exaggerating, by 15, the family and even the government will be assisting such a person to get a loan so that they can move away from their parental apartment to rent their own apartment where they can start their life. And that is not totally different from what happens in Ghana. In the UK or US. Getting mortgage to pursue some of these things is pretty much easy. But let's bring it to collectivistic context like Ghana. In Ghana, even when you are grown up, we consider you to be a mature person. You realize that still you are very much inseparable from your parents. They still consider you to be what? Their child. And so when you are going to get married, in fact, anything that has to do with your self-construct or your self-pursuit, you can't do it without your family. And all these social conventions is as a result of our collectivistic context we find ourselves in. So examples of countries that employ individualism are US, UK, Australia, Norway, Denmark, and so on and so forth. In contrast, collectivistic cultures are cultures where people have stronger bonds to their groups, and group membership forms the person's self-identity. So typical Ashanti and Akan, when you ask them to tell me about yourself, immediately after mentioning their name, then they make reference to Mayor Otekoko so Nana. All those connotations or mannerisms or commentaries is because of our collectivistic context. In other words, we tend to experience a positive sense of self whenever we try to construe ourselves by identifying with our group members. Okay. The same can be said about Asian contexts. So Asian countries such as China, Japan, as well as countries in Latin America and Africa like Ghana are higher in collectivism. So please, when you are reading, pay attention to some of the countries that are likely to fall under individualism and countries that are likely to fall under collectivism. Okay, now, so when individualists are asked a question such as, who are you? Or tell me about yourself, they are more likely to talk about their likes, dislikes, personal goals, accomplishments. Whereas collectivists, when they are asked the same question, they are likely to define themselves in relation to others, such as I'm a Chinese. And another maker say, a typical Ashanti will say, or take a horse or nana. Okay. And so on and so forth. Now let's look at some further details. So in addition to interacting with each other more often, family members have a strong sense of obligation towards each other. So here I'm referring to the collectivistic context, people that subscribe to the issue of collectivism. They do not downplay the power and their obligation towards family members or people that they find themselves with in a particular group. And this has huge implications on the practice of international HRM. This is the part that I want you to pay attention to. I'm not so much fascinated about who an individualistic person is or who a collectivistic person is. Those ones there you can easily say, but how do we relate it to international HRM? Or when someone comes from an individualistic context, what sort of implication is it likely to have on them when they find themselves working at a subsidiary level of a multinational company? Now, so I'm going to give you one example. Performance appraisal or performance management. In other words, performance evaluations. Research indicates that the individualism and collectivism continuum has a lot of implications for the practice of international human resource management. And a typical example can be subscribed from performance appraisal. Because people in collectivistic contexts tend to describe themselves by making reference to their group members, such as their family members or their co-workers. When they are given the opportunity to appraise themselves and that of their co-workers, they tend to be very much lenient. And this is the case because anytime they are overly harsh or they come out with appraisal outcomes that are very much derogatory and as a demeaning on their co-workers or their group members, it tends to also mirror who they are. So to avoid all these discomforts, they are excessively lenient when it comes to performance appraisal. Please, did you get the connection as far as the implication is concerned? All right. Now, let's move on to the next cultural dimension, which is power distance. So once again, I'm not so much fascinated about the explanations of this dimension, but I'm pretty much interested in how you articulate the implications of these cultural dimensions. Power distance refers to the degree to which the less powerful members of an organization accept that power is not distributed equally. So what are we trying to say over here? When we ask individuals to give us their impression or their perception of how power is distributed in an organization, and they go at great lengths to tell us whether it is equally distributed or it is unequally distributed, then we are making reference to power distance. So once again, power distance is also an attribute that falls in a continuum, which could be higher power distance and lower power distance, depending on the score that you advance. Now, so when we say an individual hails from a cultural context in which power distance is high, it means that power is concentrated at the top and at the upper echelon of the organization. So basically, we are talking about what? Centralization. And this power is assumed by relatively fewer people within the context of the organization, while people at the bottom are subjected to decisions and instructions by superiors. So the logic behind higher power distance is that certain categories of people in an organization are construed as all-knowing. And once they give instructions and directions, their subordinates are expected to follow all those commandments. So once again, we are juxtaposing the power relationship between what? Superiors and subordinates. Now, conversely, we can also have lower power distance. So when we say an individual comes from a cultural context where the power distance is low, it means that power is rather equally distributed among members of the society. So when you pick a typical firm in such a society, you realize that the power relationship between the superiors and the subordinates is pretty much negligible. And that is why we construe such cultural context as egalitarianism. So it comes from the word egalitarian, which means equality. Now, in higher power distance cultures, people occupying more powerful positions, such as managers, teachers, or those who are older, are viewed as more powerful and deserving what? A higher level of respect. Higher power distance cultures are hierarchical cultures where everyone has their place. So if you are a security person, you know your place in the organization. And if you are a front desk advisor or a secretary, you know your place. You can't walk straight to the CEO's office to make enquiries. Rather, you have to go through the lay down protocols. And so that is why we say it tends to be what? Hierarchical. Now, powerful people are supposed to act powerful, whilst those in inferior positions are expected to show respect. This particular point is also pretty much important because when you are brought up in a cultural context where your mindset or your framework of reference have been programmed to accept higher power distance, even when you move to a country where lower power distance is the norm, you will find yourself in an ambivalent position because that is not the norm you are used to. And so when you are even given the opportunity to be part of decision making with people who are powerful in an organization, you might construe it as what? A setup for you to fail. Now, so a Danish manager may have no problem taking advice from employees because of the lower power distance of his culture. So people that come from Denmark are construed as hailing from a cultural context with lower power distance. That means that the distance or the power relationship between superiors and subordinates or adults and younger people over there is pretty much egalitarian. And in contrast to Saudi Arabia, a manager may have issues with an informal relationship with employees because of the higher power distance. Okay. Now,
So what of Ghana, sir?
yeah, so Ghana will fall under higher power distance. That is why in a typical Ghanaian classroom, if you call your lecturer by first name, they might take offense. If you call your boss, in fact, there are some organizations where when your boss enters the organizational premises, you even have to bow or prostrate towards them as a sign of respect. Sometimes people walk, they even run to go and collect the bag of their boss the moment they show their presence at their organizational premises. And all those are manifestations of higher power distance. But in a lower power distance cultural context, you can even find the prime minister of the country commuting the same bus with a commoner. And I had that kind of experience in Norway. I was in the same bus with the prime minister at that point in time when I was there. And in fact, she nearly missed the bus. They didn't say that because she's the prime minister, they are going to wait 5 minutes more or 2 minutes more to accommodate her. She had to actually run towards the bus terminal when she saw that the bus was nearing the place. So that is a typical lower power distance regime that we are talking about. Now let's look at other examples. So Thailand is a high power distance culture, and starting from childhood, people learn to recognize who is superior, who is equal, inferior to them, and so on and so forth. So right here now, you see the mental programming has started from childhood. They are trying to help you to recognize who is superior, who is your equal, who is inferior, and how you relate with them, so that when you grow up with this, it becomes part and parcel of your frame of reference. And it will even influence how you even relate with people from different cultural contexts and how you even operate in different cultural contexts. When passing people who are more powerful, individuals are expected to bow. So I'm talking about Thailand over here. And the more powerful the person, the deeper the bow would be. Okay. But this can be something that is construed as strange in a Norwegian, typical Norwegian context. Why will you bow when your CEO shows their presence? That will seem, it will come across as absurd, and they will not be able to understand what you mean by that impression. Managers in high power distance cultures are treated with a higher degree of respect, which may surprise those in lower power distance cultures. So I quite remember in my class when I was in Norway, anytime we are trying to address the lecturers, we call them Professor, let's say Professor Berit or Professor Bete. Then they kept on reminding us to we can just call them by their first names. But unconsciously, Ghanaian students have been programmed to call their lecturers by their titles. And in fact, some lecturers will take it as an offense if they are professors and you call them Mr. Or if they are doctors and you call them by their first name. So if it is Dr. Dapila and you say Mr. Dapila, they will think you are being disrespectful. So that is a mark or a sign of a higher power distance cultural context. Now, a Citibank manager in Saudi Arabia was surprised when employees stood up every time he passed. So now, let's look at this preamble again. Managers in higher power distance cultures are treated with higher degree of respect, which may surprise those in lower power distance cultures. And we are saying that a Citibank manager who was coming from a lower power distance cultural context, but now working in Saudi Arabia, which has a higher power distance dimension, he was very much surprised that anytime he showed up at the workplace or anytime he passed by, the workforce stood up to acknowledge his presence or to show some sign of respect. And he did not find it, he find it quite strange. So these are some of the cultural clashes that I was referring to when I was talking about the dichotomy between higher and lower power distance. Similarly, in Turkey, students in elementary and high school greet their teachers by standing up every time the teacher walks into the classroom. So a signal of what? Higher power distance. In these cultures, referring to a manager or a teacher with the first name would be extremely rude. So they will consider you to be what? Disrespectful. Let me see if I've missed out anything. So any question on power distance? All right, now let's look at the implications. So that is the most important part for me. Implications, even though I implicitly referred to it when I was talking about the examples over here, it is important we hash them out here. So what are some of the implications of power distance? Managers in high power distance societies tend to believe in giving subordinates detailed instructions with little room for interpretation. So when a manager is dealing with workforce, and this manager originates from a cultural context where high power distance is the norm, it will influence him or her to be conditioned or fixated with almost always giving detailed instructions to the workforce or their subordinates. Now, subordinates are also supposed to respect the authority and the superiority of the manager, which means that the subordinate is expected to perceive the manager as what? All-knowing. And so they are, just like it happens in the military seconds, once you are ordered or you are commanded, you have to obey instructions. Okay, so that is one implication. Now, this sort of relationship is what we construe as what? Mechanistic characteristics. In other words, things are done in a mechanical manner. So in such context, inequality among members in the society is the order of the day. And it makes sense. Think about it this way. Your superior is considered to be all-knowing, and whenever they give instructions, you are supposed to follow it to the letter, which means that you are not their co-equal. And there is also lack of communication across different levels. And that is what I meant by you cannot move as a security to go and report something directly to your CEO. You have to go through the channels. So as security people, who is your supervisor? Then he will also communicate it to the next person in line, and so on and so forth. But in a typical lower power distance cultural context, it wouldn't be out of place for the security to move straight to the CEO's office to make a complaint. And it wouldn't also be out of place for the HR to be practicing what we call the open door policy. All right. So now let's move on to the third cultural dimension, which is uncertainty avoidance. Once again, this is also a continuum, so that at one end of the continuum, we can see a person's tolerance level towards uncertainty avoidance is high, or the tolerance level for ambiguity is low. Douglas. Hello, Douglas. Douglas, are you there?
Hello, sir.
Do you have a question?
Yeah, about the power distance.
Okay.
If I understand very well, it means that when the boss gives instruction, you're supposed to follow that instruction without even asking him how the thing's supposed to be, or he gives you and you're supposed to follow it like that.
Exactly. That is what I'm trying to say. And in fact,
if the situation backfired, because I have experienced certain things like that before, they will give you instruction, you have to follow it without even asking questions. When you are doing it, you reach a certain level, you could see that the thing will not go further. When you consult him, he realizes the thing has backfired. Now that they will ask you, how do you supposed to go about it? How will you handle this issue?
So, unfortunately, the issues we are talking about over here, we relate to them sometimes consciously and sometimes unconsciously. And it becomes unconscious when people even take offense the moment you try to seek for clarifications immediately after the instructions. Okay, and don't forget, we are talking about culture, how people's mindsets or frame of reference have been programmed. So when we say you have been programmed to have, you kind of say, to be hailing from a higher power distance cultural context, sometimes you are even operating unconsciously. It is only when you move out of that comfort zone that you realize that, oh, okay, there are different ways of actually doing this. And so your boss might be doing it consciously or he might be doing it unconsciously. And that is the reason why we are even learning some of these things, so that you people will become better managers. You people will better appreciate variances in opinions when you are trying to achieve a set target, or when you are trying to even give instructions to people to do it. There might be better alternatives or better ways of executing the same thing. So you shouldn't assume the position that you are all knowing and you are much better than your subordinates. Please, is it clear?
Okay, sir.
All right. So let me take the uncertainty avoidance once again. So just like the power distance and the individualistic and collectivistic cultural dimensions, uncertainty avoidance also falls in a continuum. And it refers to the degree to which a society tolerates uncertainty, or to what extent do people in a given country tolerate ambiguity. So it also has two main continuums. The first continuum is the lower tolerance level towards ambiguity, and the other half of the continuum is higher tolerance level towards ambiguity. And now I say you could be high in uncertainty avoidance, or you could be low in uncertainty avoidance. Now, what are the manifestations of this high and low characterization that I've just mentioned? Now, cultures high in uncertainty avoidance prefer predictable situations, and they have low tolerance for what? Ambiguity. So when somebody has higher uncertainty avoidance, it means that whenever they find themselves in a situation which is not very much predictable, then they are almost always uncomfortable. And that is why we say they have low tolerance for ambiguity. They always want, such people will shun ambiguous situations. Now, employees in these cultures expect a clear set of instructions and clarity in expectations. So it means that when you are managing a workforce with this particular mindset, they will always expect you to give them the instructions they have to follow in an attempt to accomplish a task. And that, in my candid opinion, can stifle creativity. Therefore, there will be a greater level of what? Creating procedures to deal with problems and writing out expected behaviors in manuals. So in such context, when supervening events occur, that is unforeseen events or events that you do not contemplate occur, it becomes very much difficult for the workforce to think on their feet, because over time they have been operating with rigid instructions. Countries that focus more on avoidance tend to minimize the uncertainty and therefore have stricter laws, rules, and other safety measures. And the logic behind these stricter laws, rules, and safety measures is to achieve conformity. They do not want to find any sort of deviation in their day-to-day pursuits. So examples of high uncertainty avoidance countries include Japan, Spain, and once again, Ghana. Now, people in a low uncertainty avoidance society, so we are looking at the other end of the continuum, are more willing to take risks and appreciate flexibility and informality in the workplace. In contrast, people in high uncertainty avoidance society tend to be risk averse, so that means they do not like taking risk, and they favor rigid and formal decision-making process. So these are the people that always like to play by the book. Moreover, countries that are more tolerant of uncertainty tend to be more easygoing and relaxed. So the US is a typical example, and they have an uncertainty avoidance score of 46. In fact, I have the seminar paper of Hofstede there, but at this level, it might be difficult for you to crack it. So that is why I did not present how they did all those interpretations. So you can at this level, you can forget about these scores. Okay. All right. Now let's look at the implications of this uncertainty avoidance. Once again, we are saying that in uncertainty avoidance, we are looking at the degree to which people prefer or find more comfort in working in a predictable or uniform environment. So to what degree do people tolerate taking risk or avoiding risk? That is the basic tenets of uncertainty avoidance. And what are the implications of these cultural dimensions as far as international HRM is concerned? Under high uncertainty avoidance, security is a strong motivator relative to achievement or self-fulfillment. And order or predictability are paramount. In other words, if I find myself working in a multinational enterprise where I am in control in terms of predicting what is likely to happen in my environment, and I say if I am an HR manager, and as far as our policies and programs are concerned, I am able to predict how it will ensue at the parent country level as well as at the subsidiary level, then my tolerance level will be high and it will affect my self-fulfillment. And the reverse is true. So at the macro level, the acceptance of uncertainty is essential for innovation because it requires a tolerance for risk and change. And that is why I was saying that if you compare cultural contexts where people constantly operate in an unprogrammed environment, where they think on their feet and they constantly confront ambiguous situations, because each of the situations is novel and demand different decision rules to be applied, it tends to enhance their level of innovation and creativity. And the reverse is true as far as cultural context, where the decision rule is pretty much programmed, where even sometimes thinking about outside the box or going contrary to instructions may come with serious reprimand. On the other hand, at the micro level or organizational level, in high uncertainty avoidance societies, numerous formal internal rules and regulations exist to control the work processes of people. So if a multinational enterprise is originally hailing from a cultural context which is high in uncertainty avoidance, they are likely to replicate these policies and programs that is filled with this philosophy at subsidiary levels where the tolerance level for ambiguity is low. And that can bring some sort of challenges because the typical Ghanaian is the one who is very much officious and expects things to be done in a rigid or a programmed manner. But this is the case where the parent company is now introducing some laxity or flexibility in the way things are pursued. And so such individuals, like a typical Ghanaian, may struggle to actually fit into the operation in such an environment. And it will take some time to sensitize them and draw their attention to the aspirations of the corporate organization so that they also conform to it with time. In low uncertainty avoidance societies, managers are allowed to exercise more latitude and discretion in decision making rather than relying on rigid internal rules and regulations. So primarily, these are some of the implications that it can have on international business and more importantly, international HRM. Now let's quickly look at masculinity and femininity as the fourth cultural dimension. So these labels, masculinity, femininity, are prescribed for societies that exhibit them. So when we say someone is coming from a masculine cultural context, it means that masculine, as far as gender role stereotypes are concerned, masculine gender attributes is the order of the day in such cultural contexts. Likewise, when we say an individual is coming from a feministic cultural context, it simply indicates that the individual is coming from a cultural context where feminine role stereotypes assumes the order of the day. In other words, a lot of people subscribe to and exhibit feminine role stereotypes. And what are some of these stereotypes? So, the feminine one, typical example include caring for the weak, emphasizing on quality of life, being less competitive. Whereas the masculine roles or stereotypes include emphasizing on achievements or valued achievements, being very much gregarious, competitive, emphasis on monetary acquisitions and other monetary objects. So, whereas the feminine cultural context subscribe to feminine values such as caring for the weak, emphasizing on quality of life, blah, blah, blah. The masculine cultures also emphasize on these masculine attributes such as value achievement, competitiveness, wealth acquisition, and so on and so forth. And it is a continuum. In this continuum, you are likely to be labeled based on your score as exhibiting feminine cultural traits or masculine cultural traits. And for that matter, you are likely to be labeled under femininity or masculinity. Now, this also has huge implications for international business and particularly international HRM. For example, in masculine cultures, the ratio of CEO pay to other management levels tend to be high, indicating that these cultures are more likely to reward CEO with higher level of pay as opposed to other types of rewards. Now, this is closely akin to the power distance. Usually in masculine cultural contexts, the power distance between superiors and subordinates is also what? Wide. And for that matter, perceiving the authority of their superiors as being paramount, it is substantial that they also receive a reward that is what? Higher than the rest of the people in the company. And so the key implication over here is that when it comes to reward management or compensation and benefits, masculine cultures tends to subscribe for a pay system that's reward people that are powerful in the organization. And I say people that occupy powerful positions in the organization are given higher reward in masculine context. Unlike in feminine cultural context where you could be the CEO of a firm or of a company, but depending on the number of hours you work in a month, a security person or a mere cleaner is likely to earn higher than you. And this one, I'm not saying is in, I'm not saying it is theoretical. I have actually experienced it. At a point in time, I knew some colleagues who were earning much higher than the managers of a hotel they were working in back in the days when I was outside. And so this tells you that whenever you find yourself in a cultural context where the compensation and benefits system does not regard your strata or the position you hold in an organization, but it rather takes into consideration the number of hours you have worked in order to reward you accordingly, then we are dealing with a feminine cultural context, and the reverse is true. So the femininity of a culture affects many work practices, such as the level of work-life balance. So typically, in a feminine cultural context, because they subscribe to feminine traits, such as emphasizing quality of life, a typical Norwegian employee can spend 6 months traveling the whole world and still be able to take good care of themselves. And this is simply because that particular cultural context subscribes to a feminine trait of what? Ensuring or emphasizing on quality of life. So whenever when we take the work-life balance index, we realize that these Scandinavian countries like Norway, Sweden are at the top there because of their feminine cultural attributes. Then you find places like US, UK struggling at the bottom because of their masculine cultural attributes. Let me see if I've left anything out so far. All right. Now let's look at the implications. Implications of masculinity versus femininity. Top management positions are usually filled with men who tend to display characteristics of dominance and assertiveness, which tend to be discouraged among women's societal gender norms. So we are saying that in a typical masculine cultural context, almost always you find out that positions that are held in high esteem in the organization are occupied by men simply because implicitly people from that particular context perceive that men tend to be more domineering and very much assertive. And so they will be able to take good decisions and stand by them for the benefits of the society. Sorry, for the organization. Again, overall organizations with a feminine culture are not as competitive as those with masculine culture, since the former places higher priority on concern for others and little distinction made between men and women of the same position. So we are saying that in cultural contexts that are markedly characterized by femininity is likely to have little distinction between the men and women as far as their gender role stereotypes are concerned. Now, let me give you a typical example as far when it comes to international HRM. Still on the implications. So, now, when you pick the labor law of Ghana, what is the minimum number of days that women can go on when it comes to maternity leave? Who can help me here? Maternity leave is how many?
It's 3 months.
3 months. Okay, so roughly 90 days.
Yeah.
Now, will you be in a position to tell me whether it has some pronouncement about paternity leave?
The proposal is now being pushed through.
Who was speaking?
Ronald, sir.
Okay, Roland, good. So as we speak now, the labor law does not have any clause on paternity leave. So when your organization gives you, say, 3 days or 5 days or 6 days to be able to bond with the newborn after childbirth, they are exercising it out of their own compassion. The labor law does not have any clause to regulate that. Now, when you go to cultural contexts like Norway, for maternity leave, the woman can enjoy 1 whole year maternity leave after childbirth. 1 whole year maternity leave after childbirth. And they will be entitled to the salary that they were previously taking. So this brings us back to the issue of subscribing to feminine cultural attributes. Still on the issue of leave after childbirth, in Norway, in fact, in the Scandinavian countries, so Denmark, Sweden, Finland, and so on and so forth, a man can also enjoy paternity leave, and it comes in 2 main categorizations. So the man can enjoy 1 whole year paternity leave and still get access to either, the last time I checked, it was 60% of their salary, or they will go for 6 months paternity leave, and they'll be entitled to 100% of their salary. Now, if you bring this issue here, in fact, if you try to make this argument here in Ghana, I am pretty much sure that the women themselves will rise against it, because the question they will be asking is that, or did leave no krana or they on family. And this brings us back to how we have been, in terms of our mental programming, how we have been nurtured from our infancy, that even when you give men the liberty or the opportunity to bond and connect with their offspring after childbirth, they are likely to use that time for other things as opposed to that of, how do you call it, actually bonding with the child. And so one of the key issues as far as the ongoing debate about paternity leave in Ghana is that it has to be seconded by your spouse. So in this circumstance, your wife have to be giving feedback to your organization that he's actually using it to help me, as he duly said that he is going to subscribe for it to bond with the child and so on and so forth. Please, is this clear as far as masculinity and femininity is concerned? And when you are reading, please pay attention to the implications and some of the examples I'm giving, because at the end of the day, all of you can rattle what the dimensions are, but we are interested in how you'll be able to link it to some of these issues that I'm raising.
Sir.
Yeah, okay, Isa, go on.
Yeah, honestly, if not because of your explanation, I would have been misled by the masculinity and then the
Femininity.
Yes.
Okay.
Because looking at when I first heard or when I first saw those two words, my mind averted me to masculinity being somebody, maybe the company may be veered to be more focused on employing men than employing females. And that is what I was thinking.
Oh,
and then
okay.
the explanation tend to be different. So
yeah.
I appreciate the explanation.
Right.
So I
Thank
thought, let
you.
me make it. Yeah.
Thank you very much for the feedback. And please, once again, you have to be very, very careful. Though. These are terminologies, and I say they are words or labels. So depending on how the authorities behind these labels in their theorization explain them, you also have to reason along that line. So typically, if you were to be doing marketing or strategic HRM, you can say femininity in advertisement. Your mind should be about, for instance, why we tend to be using or projecting nudity in advertisement. There is actually a paper on that, femininity in advertisement, why most business firms try to advertise their goods and services by attaching semi-nude, or if you like, at least presenting it with women. But we are also looking at it from Hofstede's point of view, where here our interest is on the attributes. So which attributes do we generically say that, as for this one, typically it is a man who is supposed to do that, not a woman. Now, another example on the implications is that, so let me use the femininity one this time around. When it comes to, so let me ask you, which of the various genders, so men and women, which of them are you likely to come across to be a driver in Ghana? Someone who is likely to drive a bus or this, you know, say.
Yeah, tipper truck.
Tipper truck, yeah. Who are you likely to come across to be the driver?
Men.
Okay. So all those things are indications or manifestations that we are operating in a masculine cultural context. If you go to Norway now, in fact, not only Norway, I tend to be using that place because that is where I'm
But
familiar
that's
with.
I think that is debatable.
Okay, who is speaking?
Ronald, sir.
Okay, Roland, go on.
If we center our concentration on maybe the driving aspect, then we are thinking about the male.
Okay.
Now, when we go to the food industry, everybody will be thinking about women.
Okay.
Take for instance, when
the
you
food
talk
industry.
About when you talk about restaurant, what comes to mind? Women.
Yeah.
When you talk about commodity market, the market, our local market, what comes to mind? Women.
And so you are saying that example will mean that we are not operating in what a masculine context, right?
Exactly. That is what I'm saying.
But so let's look at it globally. When it comes to taking care of the home, in terms of cooking, all those household chores, which people do we subscribe to be the dominant actors over there? Roland, can you answer me?
Yeah, women.
Yeah, women.
So that is not something which is unique to only the non-Western and also the collectivistic context. That one is universal.
That's right.
Intina, when I was first of all explaining the summary for the 4 or 5 dimensions that Hofstede presented, I made reference to the fact that there are commonalities and differences.
Oh,
The
okay.
commonalities are the ones that are found globally and sometimes within the cultural context that you are comparing. Now, the variations or the differences are the ones that help us to know that you are dealing with another person from a different cultural context. Please, is it clear now?
Yes, sir. It's clear.
All right. Now, even on cooking, still on cooking, which of the genders are you likely to find to be operating check or fried rice? Please, who can answer? By the way, do you know check or fried
That
rice?
area to a lot of men go.
Because the management of that particular check and our fried rice, comes with a lot of prestige and wealth acquisition. So once again, wealth acquisition abem. And so we are moving on to the kind of say masculine feature. Please, is it clear?
Yes, sir.
All right, thank you very much. Now let's look at the last part. And I will say it once again. Don't go and throw the slice away and wait till last minute, because these things, it is fresh now. So you might think, oh, this one there is straightforward. If you say this, then the other continuum is this, then you add and then you go. Please go and go over it again and try to make your own notes. I know why I'm saying this. Yes, Genevieve.
Please, sir, this company, Zen.
Zen. Is it the ones into oil?
The ones supplying fuel.
Fuel, okay.
They are doing both masculinism and
masculinity and femininity. Okay, explain it and let me see.
And now they also have female that drive the tanker.
Okay. They are tanker trucks.
Yes.
Okay.
Which really promoted.
Yes, it's true. I think most of them are women.
Okay. So
if you look at the trucks that is written ladies' bed.
Okay.
That is only ladies who are driving it.
All right.
There are ladies in the truck driving it.
Okay. So thank you very much for bringing this to my attention. And let me clarify something over here. So all this while I was explaining it at the surface level, and then I wanted you to get the basics. But because of this example, let me go to the next level. When we say a particular group of people have an attribute, or an answer, they have the manifestation of being feminist, or being masculine, it doesn't mean we are looking at only a group of individuals, but we are looking at the amalgamation, and answer the majority in that cultural context. So if you look at the general workforce in Ghana, and answer people that are likely to drive these kind of trucks now, is it the norm in Ghana? And answer, it is just some individual organizations that are trying to make a change. Now, if it is the norm that even Okada and I'm trying to say Trotro, you will find women driving them, then the example you are giving will not be an exception, because we are referring to what? The norm. So some labels, all these labels that Hofstede generated, he was talking about what majority of people in that particular society are likely to do. So a typical Ghanaian lady, will he be receptive toward driving an articulator truck or not? A typical Norwegian, will such a person be receptive towards driving an articulator or not? If your answer is no, then you will know the continuum where you fall. Please, Genevieve, is the clarification clear now?
Yes, sir. But I have a question to you.
Who is speaking now? Let me see.
Genevieve.
Genevieve, hey, Mabel, let me give an opportunity to another person before you come back, okay? Jennifer, okay. Were you trying to ask a question?
No, sir.
Were you trying to ask a question?
No, sir.
All right. Then Genevieve, go on.
Well, sir, I want to know, since you have been to Norway and you have experienced this, I believe you have inquired why women. Because
okay, we'll go on.
Ghana's own, for example, you know, I would say that Zen have put this strategy in a way also to show that women can also be in that position of men.
Okay.
And also empower or encourage ladies or women to do such job.
Okay, good.
Some women are really bold to drive all the way. We've seen the ladies' bed. They drive all the way to Burkina Faso.
Oh, okay.
Yes. Because there are two. When they go all the way to Burkina Faso, there are three ladies in the bus, in the truck.
Okay.
One drives to a certain kilometers of hours and then rest, and then the other one takes over. This one is a strategy to the company.
Okay.
And as we raise the throttle, ladies driving throttle, it is not a strategy. I would say that it is lack of job or situation at home whereby they cannot bear it. So make you not driving to have to put food on a table.
Okay, so I get the angle you are coming from. But once again, Roland, do you want to assist her in answering?
I just want to educate all of us now.
Very good. Go on.
Genevieve, the world is moving away from management programs to leadership programs. And corporate organizations, governments, and everybody is trying to balance gender in its dealings. So this Zen company, for instance, you are giving us as a test case, it's nothing new. You be expecting more of such things in the coming days. That is what I want to say, sir.
Good. So in addition to what Roland just said, in an attempt to move away from this colloquial or old adage that the place of the woman is at the kitchen and that of the man is in the office, that is why some of these strategies are being put in place to empower women. But in the strict sense of it, we have been programmed from our infancy to accept that as for women, they shouldn't be engaging in activities that are more, if you like, that can expose them to a lot of danger. So when it comes to even football, some years back, how many of you would have even accepted when you were given the opportunity to go and play football? But as we speak now, those opportunities as a result of empowerment and enlightenment are now being explored. And all this go back to how our mind have been programmed from childhood or infancy. And it is because of education and enlightenment. That is why you are all now seeing that it is something that women can do. When they were embarking on this Beijing conference and women were pushing for equal rights and opportunity through empowerment, at that point in time, their own colleagues were resisting because in their frame of reference, it wasn't the norm. Please, is it clear? So it goes back to the issue of culture and how it has prepared you to be receptive towards certain things and not to be receptive towards other things. Yes, Ellen. Hello, Ellen. Ellen, I can see your hand up.
Hello, sir.
Can you speak louder? Go on.
Please, can you hear me now?
Yeah, if you can get closer to your microphone. I'm struggling to hear you.
I want to
Hello.
sir,
Hello, Ellen. Are you still speaking?
yes, I'm speaking.
Go on, go on.
I said, from what you said about this doctor,
Uh-huh.
I said, for me, where I'm working, we
Uh-huh.
are now doing something in such a way that what men can do, we women can do and do it better.
Okay.
So right now, we don't have something that they think that only men can do it. No. So the bus driver is taking a example. I don't agree with her because as a man can drive a person, a woman too can drive.
Okay. Thank
Right
you
now,
very
there
much.
are still some people telling that the maternity leave that the women are doing, the men see they enjoy it. In Ghana here.
Okay. Okay.
So
So
also will come to be a gender balance.
uh-huh.
That what men and the women can do and do it better.
Much better. Okay.
That's why the G4C, you want the more men to shine. So that when you have the G4C, there's no way the men will take it, the women cannot do it. So the men are going, you can also go there and do it and do it better.
Okay. Okay. All right. Thank you very much. In fact, your contribution has even reminded me of um, how gender empowerment, the pedestal it has reached at some parts of Norway. Um, when you go to the northern part of Norway, over there, as we speak, the men tend to, in terms of their style of dressing, they tend to appear or come across more like the women. And the women also tend to come across more like the men. What I'm trying to say is that over there, and like the empowerment has gone to, it has gotten to a point where we can say there is equality. So there isn't any job or jurisdiction where you can say that as for this one, it is designated for only men, and this one is for that of women. But until then, the way culture has primed us to accept things as norm and certain things as not normal have to be reappropriated or reoriented. Other than that, some of these things you encounter a lot of challenges in an attempt to even implement it for a target audience, which is going to even benefit them. Okay. All right. So enough of the, let's see. Now, so I've touched on masculinity, femininity, individualism, collectivism, power distance, time horizon. So I think that is all for the dimensions. And the general conclusions that Hofstede drew. What is the time? Good, we still have some time. Please, can you still see my screen?
Yes, sir.
So you can see the conclusion.
Yes.
Yeah.
All right. So,
It's 9:36.
and so we'll be finishing very soon. So the basic conclusion that Hofstede came to was that it will be suicidal for multinational enterprises to assume the strategies that they formulate and implement at the headquarters will always yield favorable results when such strategies or programs are implemented in different cultural contexts. And this is so because the way of doing things, and later on when I start picking the various HR practices and apply them, you realize that each of them has a cultural connotation when it comes to performance management, when it comes to recruitment and selection. In some contexts, when you visit the interview panel, the first question they ask you is, who sent you? And I say, so my sister even encountered this when she was going for an interview, the entrance interview for medicine, the medical entrance in the interview. They asked her that, do you have, the first question, do you have a family member who is a medical doctor? And she said no. Then the remaining questions, you can imagine, baby. But in other cultural contexts, when it comes to recruitment and selection, emphasis is placed on placing square pegs in square holes and not square pegs in round holes. Emphasis is placed on people with competent skills that will fit not only the job they are going to perform, but that of the organizations in entirety. And so in the coming days, we'll be looking at how all these cultural nuances can be applied to international HRM as we pick them in terms. Now, let me quickly take you through. So these ones, they are pretty much straightforward. You can read them. And they are suggestions on how you can manage cultural diversity. It is not actually linked to what we are doing today, but because it has some connotations with culture and how you can be able to have a diverse workforce with little room for cultural crashes, I thought it's wise to include it here. So we are saying in here that you have to help your employees to build cultural intelligence. That is, you have to sensitize them to be receptive or accommodating towards different opinions and different cultural ways of doing things. And once you do this, it will take care of ethnocentrism. Ethnocentrism in the sense that you shouldn't have the view or the mindset that your way of doing things is superior to how people do things in other cultural contexts. And you should also listen to the local nationals that you'll be dealing with, because at the end of the day, they are your key resources who will be assisting you to achieve your set objectives. And so once you listen to them to make some adjustments to the policies and programs as it maintains from the headquarters, then we can say that you'll be on a pedestal to achieve greater heights. Then you also have to recognize that culture changes. Let's go to the convergence and divergence. Now, indirectly or implicitly, I've been explaining these two concepts, but I want to now throw more shade or light on it so that when you come across them in your readings, you will know what it primarily tries to admonish. Now, so convergence, divergence, let me explain it in a simple balance. When we say HR policies or practices are converging, it means that whatever policies and practices we are implementing at the headquarters is the same thing that is happening at the subsidiary levels. So in other words, we are all doing one thing using the same standard. Now, with respect to divergence, it is said to have occurred when the policies and practices which maintains at the headquarters is modified or deviates to suit the tastes and preferences of the local nationals that will be managed. In other words, whereas a certain, let me use this maternity leave issue as an example. I want to say in Ghana, we say the minimum is 90 days or 3 months. And I was saying in Norway, you can get 1 whole year. And even when there are some complications, they can extend this beyond a year for you. Assuming the headquarters is in Ghana, and we say they are practicing divergence, the implication is that when we go to Norway, we will allow them to implement the labor law concerning maternity leave over there. When we go to Gabon, we will allow that subsidiary to also implement the labor law over there, and so on and so forth. That will be what? Divergence. Now, convergence will be, a typical example of convergence will be a situation where at the headquarters, we are using a particular performance management strategy. And we are also using a specific performance appraisal technique, which is yielding favorable results. So assume that sort of appraisal is used at the headquarters in USA. And we come to Ghana, we disregard the cultural context and the connectedness of people over here. And we still go ahead to implement the same performance appraisal strategy or performance management strategy. Then we say that we are practicing convergence. Please, is the distinction clear?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Thank you very much. So, any questions? Right now, you can unmute your microphone and start asking me questions if you have.